This is the town of Guînes in the Pas-de-Calais in France, close to the location of the Field of the Cloth of Gold meeting between King Henry VIII and King Francois of France in 1520. I'm standing on the place where the castle used to be, which was then part of England, and the meeting took place at not so far out from here, about 3.5 kilometres, and one of the fields over there in the distance, in the direction of the town of Ardes, which was then in France. So it was like halfway between the two villages. Let's have a little bit more look at what actually happened there. This is French route D231. In that direction is the village of Guînes, which in 1520 was in England, and in the opposite direction is the village of Ardes, which in 1520 was in France. Here then was in England, so I'm like halfway between the two villages, but very close to the French border. This was the place where King Henry VIII met King Francois I of France in June 1520. This is the Field of the Cloth of Gold. Well, as you can see, they've packed everything up, so there's not much left. And if you're coming for the fountains, which ran not with water but with wine, it looks as though they've drunk it all. There's this obelisk here to recall that moment when I would say the first ever summit meeting took place between leaders of two different countries with the aim of stopping war for all time. Now, this piece unfortunately didn't last. This one only lasted 2 years. But as Simon Schama said, words to the effect of, this was more deadly than war. This was a combat of style, and both kings were trying to outdo each other in style with the prefabricated palaces that they brought here. Today I came here by bike, and now I want to have a look at the village of Ardes down there. And this is the beginning of the village of Bellingham, where both Henry and Francois stayed during the Field of the Cloth of Gold celebrations in June 1520. It was then in England. Here we have a copy of a painting which was done by the artist Friedrich Butterwerk. Now, Friedrich Butterwerk came from Tarnowskie Góra, then Tarnowitz. Today it's just the north of Katowice, then in Upper Silesia. So he was a German painter, but he spent a great deal of time in France. He was a 19th century painter, and he copied this, possibly believing it to be a work of Holbein, which is normally given to be from 1545. The original of this one you can see in the Wolsey room in the Royal Collection in Hampton Court. If in fact this does date to 1545, then that was quite clever, Holbein, because he died in 1543. Nonetheless, it could in fact be his work if the date is wrong, or indeed the date could be correct, only the painting was started earlier and finished by somebody else. What we have is a scene of the Field of the Cloth of Gold, painted some 25 years later from the point of view of the English, and it represents English glory. Now, when we look at anything of this nature, we must appreciate that it's done from the political perspective of when it was actually painted, and not from when it was meant to represent. I know there's only 25 years in between the two, but major things happened in the meantime, such as the English Reformation. Now, what we've got here is obviously Henry here takes pride of place. Now, in the original, his head has been replaced. Now, there's three reasons why this could actually have happened. The first is that in 1536, Holbein did a painting of Henry, and Henry really liked it. And so when this was actually done, he may have said, no, take me out and put that updated version of me onto it. Now here, Henry does seem to be a little on the corpulent side, not as corpulent as he was by 1545, but I suspect it does represent him more maybe a little bit later. Maybe I'm over-interpreting there. Two other reasons for the change in Henry's face. First is that in 1620 or thereabouts, I believe it was the Spanish ambassador actually vandalized some pictures in the what was to become the royal collection. I think it was the ambassador. I know there was some complaint was actually written about it, so they could have been repaired. And another idea is that this was actually vandalised by people, Republicans in the period of Cromwell, because Henry looked too regal. Whatever, his face was actually changed. And Henry actually appears in this picture in two other places. And one is in a wrestling match, which we can see up there. Now, what happened with the wrestling match was Henry and Francois were sitting down somewhere, and Henry said to Francois, look, my brother, that's how he called him, let's do a spot of wrestling. Now, it was a bad idea of Henry's, because this sort of thing is the sort of thing that could end up with all sorts of trouble. And Francois accepted him. Henry had him in a hold, but Francois was quite skilled and actually threw him. And this apparently put Henry in a bit of a sulk under one account. Another account says Francois saying, okay, let's go and eat something now. And then they went off. If the account with Henry putting in a sulk, Francois went up to him very apologetically, and they became friends again immediately after. Shows that Henry, of course, can't have been much of a sport. There's a lot of sporting events going on during it, such as the jousting, and both Henry and Francois had a go at the jousting. Jousting, of course, is extremely dangerous. Henry had two serious accidents jousting in his life. In 1536, he caused Anne Boleyn to miscarry. He lost consciousness for 2 hours, and that, which of course would have been very serious. And this injury itself may have been the cause of some of his megalomania after that, when he turned from being a friendly, jovial person to an utter tyrant. During the Field of the Cloth of Gold, one person was actually killed. It was a French knight who was killed by his own brother while jousting. Anyway, let's have a look at some of the other features in the painting. So what we see here, the central part here, that's Guînes, that's the castle of Guînes, which was destroyed in 1558 or thereafter, when it was recaptured by the French. So not long after this was actually painted. Now, what we see there, the top left-hand corner, I think that's meant to represent England. I don't, or the British Isles anyway. I don't know, I'm just guessing there. Top there we see a dragon, which I believe is meant to be a salamander, which was the symbol of King Francois. We see this long train of the English coming into, or coming around Guînes, coming into Guînes. And I think this town here is Guînes, with Calais at the sea. This big palace here was a prefabrication. So it was put up specially for the event. And outside there we've got two fountains. There's either 2 or 3 fountains which offered wine. One was said to offer a drink which is made from mulled wine with spices. Another one could be ale. Now, to have some of the effects, we see 2 people brawling. Maybe that was that they drank too much beer, and where somebody else here has possibly had too much wine. On the subject of food, we've also got here, got the sheep there, they're destined to be eaten. A huge amount of meat had to be brought over. Obviously these were kings. Meat was the food of kings, peasants ate vegetables. Henry was noted for the amount and quality and quantity of the meat he ate. Obviously part of his problems related to weight was to do with the amount of food he ate. He was clearly diabetic by the end of his life, this is. I think that some of his problems could have been done by the amount of sugar he actually consumed. Sugar was obviously only for the very wealthy, but Henry was in that class, and he used to put sugar in his wine, which he drank in rather copious amounts. People drank ale because the water supply was not up to drinking. Clean water is something which came much later. In fact, you couldn't really enjoy it at all if you lived in the towns. Up there we can see what I think is the town of Ard. King Henry went to Ard to be entertained by the Queen of France, and King Francois came to Guînes and was entertained by Catherine of Aragon. When he was here, the chronicler said that he kissed all the ladies who were there except for 4 or 5 who were either too old or too ugly to be kissed. Now, Catherine of Aragon was obviously out of favour, as well as being dead by the time that this was actually painted. Now, the divorce proceedings, the attempted divorce, start 1527 and didn't get divorced until 1533 when he married Anne Boleyn. So I think a painter wouldn't want to put Catherine in the picture, or at least in a very minor role. So I'm going to ask, is that Catherine there in the tent whom we can scarcely see? Maybe it is, but the Queen's played a very important role and therefore really needed to be seen in this picture. Why was it called the Field of Cloth of Gold? So they got this gold coloured cloth for these tents, and that, the big one there is meant to be Henry's tent, I think, and so you've got two of them here. Whether or not it was gold or not, I don't know, but it may have been sort of some gold coloured thread or something like that, which at a distance made it seem as though the whole thing was actually golden. They wanted to show their wealth and their splendour, which was the object of the entire exercise. I'm not an art critic. I'm not really a historian of the Tudor period. I'm a modern historian, so I may have over-interpreted, I may have missed things. There may be things of great importance that I did not see. So if you disagree with anything I've said, please put your comments below. And as you can see, the Field of the Cloth of Gold is not forgotten. Over 2 weekends, October 2016, there will be, or probably there was by the time you see this, a celebration. There's Henry and there's Francois together. Of course, Henry was then 30 and the gentleman there looks a good 20 years older, but never mind. It's the idea that counts.